John M. for one tag. No one seems to acknowledge that it's changed so dramatically. I'm in my 50s. I recently met a guy my age and we began talking about how just the phone has changed things completely. We reminisced about how things were. It was like the Twilight Zone.
REId8 for 20 standing him 56, born in 66. Grew up in the 70s and 80s. Not only are things drastically changing, but it's all intentional, and it's not good. I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone, a backwards world. We're actually regressing in the name of progression.
At Cummins was 17 standing. I was born in 1948 and although nobody had much money, we did have freedom to work wherever we wanted. There was wonderful music and fashion. We were young and free, of course, we thought this was normal. Now we see that normal changes over time. We were close to the Second World War, so we had a contrast from the experience of our parents and grandparents. I believe my generation were blessed. I hope my grandchildren get to be free and happy. I am not convinced that the world will ever return to freedom of expression and support to be who we really are. I wish everyone reading this all the luck and love in the world.
6 is an media for 11 standing. My adopted father was born in 1919. His father was in one. I am 48 and didn't have indoor plumbing until age 11. At my childhood, I was raised very much in the manner of a Depression-era farm, and with the stories of those times. The perspective from this is bizarre. I often feel like some kind of time traveler for it. The world feels very, very strange today, in some good ways, but many bad. If you are lucky enough to have grandparents alive, who remember, treasure that and listen to them as long as you can.
Skip over 20 standing. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. It's frustrating as a 54-year-old and a history freak to recognize how much I still don't know about the world. This essay gave me another avenue to explore. And yes, it can also be frustrating seeing younger people tossed into the world still ignorant of the basics through no fault of their own, as well as people of all ages being deliberately manipulated into believing lies by a ruthless, childish, wealthy elite and the media structures they've created for that purpose, among many other things.
When life gives you. For 6 standing. Speaking as a 22-year-old, things have changed drastically for young people and what is expected of them. University isn't what it is, jobs aren't what they were, family isn't, and friendship isn't. People are kind of shut off. I think our society is changing and it's changing us too, the way we feel about things and each other. It's really scary and sad as a young person to feel so uncertain about what life feels so weird when my parents don't claim to have felt this same way at my age.
Tyler Oveda for one tag. From the comments I've read so far, a lot of people that watched the video were born before 2000s, but as someone born in 2001 who just turned 21, this pending fear of a collapsing society is sickening, and it's kind of been something I've felt for a while. Post-pandemic world has made the institutions that once kept society stable not so stable anymore. Even academia doesn't hold the same power it once did. I definitely feel something has changed and it's only going to change more. Would love to hear more about this conversation.
Muscle man for 8 standing. I have been trying to explain this feeling to everyone in my life, and nobody can quite put their finger on it, but everyone can sense the difference. I think it began when touchscreen smartphones had fully taken their place in the world. I didn't start feeling this way until 2016 when I had turned 16 years. Once everyone and their grandmother had easy access to the internet and Facebook, the quality of our social lives began tanking immediately. Back then we thought things like Gangnam Style and cat pictures were just these funny new things called memes, yet they were really the signaling of the new technocratic era. When everyone in the world from New York to Zimbabwe was making Gangnam Style dance videos, something changed permanently. The ability to influence the entire world population instantly over a small cell phone in their pocket is what triggered the downward spiral we find ourselves in today.
Sally Button was 16 Stunden bearbeitet. I was born in 1963. For the past 5 years or so I've been thinking very hard, very deeply about why life in general seems so very changed. Almost as if it's undergone a strange metamorphosis. I came to the conclusion that it is probably due to my advanced age. Of course, life as an adult is very different to life as the child that I once was, but try as I might I still can't quite put my finger on this shift. I find it frightening when I read comments from youngsters in their teens, early 20s however, that despite their age look back at the old days well before they were born, wish life was indeed still like that. Even they can feel there is a change in the general scheme of things that is not for the better. It's like we are all waiting for something but we don't quite know what it is, as if the world is holding its breath, so to speak.
Jose Melendez for 20 Stunden. Not only has everything massively changed, but something is looming right in our direction and yet we can't see it. Something or someone is coming and our very lives will change again.
Oh ye was 7 Stunden bearbeitet. Man, this video is everything I've been thinking the last few years. I'm scared to date, I'm nervous to make new friends because of the fact that everyone is recording everyone, and one wrong statement you make can ruin you. I can go on and on with the change of how life and humans have changed. I miss the payphone days, I miss the 80s so much that I'm considering moving to a third world country just to feel like a human being again. Sometimes I wish I was born in 1920.
Anna Tannenberger for 15 Stunden. I'm 68. Growing up, I got used to hearing old people talking about how things have changed. My grandfather was born before the Wright brothers' first brief flight. And before he died he went on a 4-hour flight on holiday with us. But it does seem as if things are changing much faster. But it is not technological changes that are disturbing, but morality and changing outlooks. I was the first of the teenagers that were shamed for being a virgin and a prude. Yet I'm still grateful for that upbringing. Did the contraceptive pill really give girls the freedom to be promiscuous, or did it just disempower them by making it more difficult to say no? And many of the other liberated thinking just increasingly seem to me like dead ends.
J. Alexander for 22 Stunden bearbeitet. Yes, everything has changed. If young people your age are aware of it, imagine what it feels like for those of us who are much older. It's terrifying.
Chalura Berlin vor 5 Stunden bearbeitet. How we interact with the world has changed insane amounts over the last 20 years. This is coming from a Gen Z. The habits we have, the friends we make, the way we date, the jobs we have, the way we shop. It's all technology driven and it's unsustainable. I, for one, am really trying to assess the ways in which I am playing into this weird behavior and working on changing, even if it doesn't make a difference. Like, I do not like that I feel uncomfortable with going out and trying to find dates in the real world. That's now how humans and chemistry works. It's these little things that I think impact my life greatly.
Under G 17 or 19 Stunden, I began to feel more and more inclined to voice it, as I felt during my time in college at the University of Minnesota 2012-16, that something indeed was changing. People began to more and more share very turbulent feelings. Why is everyone so offended by everything now? 2014 was where I really began to notice, and the combination of our conflicting politics that ultimately led to the 2016 presidential election failed, and now this COVID-19-ridden world, have led us to what I have been saying for years now. We are living in a culture shock. The future has turned from a bright idea full of hope for young 28-year-olds like me to a threat. The positions of power in our current climate are not looked to with honor, promise, or ideas of strong leadership. We see those among us who simply share other ideas as enemies and would rather mark them down as unintelligent or not worth our time. It's become a sad world, and the hardest part is that it's becoming more and more difficult to place trust in just about anything. However, I refuse to give up. To anyone who's read this entire comment, I don't think you should ever give up either. As humans today, we're obligated to make the world a better place, no matter how small the action or words. So until my time is up, I'm gonna keep on going.
Judith Burgess vor 7 Stunden 75 English lady living in France here. So glad you've come up in my feed. I've subbed as what you say resonates deeply with me. I've seen change upon change over time. I feel foreboding and dread of where we are now. The last COVID years have accelerated the decline. What I find difficult is the apparent obliviousness of the great majority as to what is playing out. We need to nurture our souls in nature and beauty, in genuine connection to other human beings. Stay strong, everyone. Peace and love to you all.
Caden Smith vor 20 Stunden. This man deserves to be at 500 keys. Well done. Editing, research, and delivery are top tier.
And even vor 20 Stunden. Yup, I think all millennials feel it too. I also kept going back to read about the cycles from 100 years ago, and it kind of looks similar to today. 1918 Spanish flu, 1920s roaring 20s, 1929 market crash, 1930 depression likely led to tension, 1939 War II. I think we pretty much hit the first three in the last few years alone. I think it's the same sequence but much faster because of technology.
Skosocial vor 3 Tajan. I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s. The 90s were good. The world was so different it's hard to explain to someone who never experienced it. We're never going back to those times. I'm just happy I could live it.
Jennifer Davis vor 4 Stunden bearbeitet. Great video. I was born in 77 in Chicago and feel so lost. The world seems so cold, chaotic and selfish more often than not. Thank you for helping me put a finger on what is happening. Makes total sense. This brought me some peace. I am hopeful for a better world for my young children. All I can do is raise them to be resilient and hard-working individuals that give back, have faith, and don't focus on the material. Wishing peace, health and happiness for us all for the coming year.
Chunky McGillicuddy vor 1 Stunden. This video really hit home for me. I'm 42 years old and growing up in the 80s and 90s was an amazing time. We didn't need the internet to connect with someone and there was no social media bringing out the worst in people. It definitely feels like something has changed, and I've had this conversation with a good friend of mine quite a bit lately. It's weird how we all seem to have this feeling, but no one can pinpoint what the hell it is exactly. We need more thought-provoking videos like this. Hopefully we can figure out a way to make this a better world and stop all the division and hate we are so used to seeing and experiencing these days. I don't have any kids, but I hope the younger generation wakes up to a better world tomorrow than what they had yesterday.
Mikey 80,528 vor 11 Stunden. I've been feeling this for quite some time. It's been visceral for about 5 years, and when the pandemic hit I really feared it would accelerate negative trends and our global decline. I think it has done that, but at the same time it exposed the underbelly to so many people and helped raise a level of awareness, even if it may be too late to do anything about it.
Critcha 32 vor 16 Stunden. I feel the change, brother. I was born in 1988, and I got to experience the 90s from the viewpoint of a wide-eyed innocent child. Now of course, we tend to look back with rose-tinted glasses to our youth, but I swear everything seemed so much better. There was less paranoia, entertainment actually strived to be art, video games had a kind of purity and innocence about them, and there were no DMN smartphones. When my family moved to a new place, first thing I would do is try to befriend the children of the local neighbors, and we did that by meeting face to face, not glancing at a frickin' app or whatever. I felt like we were all being ourselves, and not trying to create an image we think others want to see. Every time I think back to those times, I'm very sad they're gone, but also grateful I have the memories. Now it feels like I'm descending down into a dark pit with everyone else, clinging onto something to give me hope. I take comfort in the fact that I'm not alone in this, and I do believe good times will come again far in the future. I just fear we have a bit of suffering to do before we get there.
Hannah Ivor 5 stunned and I'm glad this is being talked about. I was only thinking about this the other night. I'm 32. The 90s and the zeros felt more real. It's hard to explain. Also feels like time is going faster.
Johnny McAdams vor 2 Tajan bearbeitet. I was born in 89 and think about this a lot. I ask my friends who are in their 40s and 50s if the 90s and early zeros were actually a happier time, or if it was just my child perspective. They all agree that it was a happier time as well. The overall mood of the world was just more fun and light-hearted. I believe it started to shift after 9/11.
Jimmy Bowling vor 19 stunden bearbeitet. Yes. Born in the 80s. 9/11 made things different. It was aptly timed being a young adult. It was the end of innocence for me. I could never pin down if it was the world changing after 9/11 or if it was just the pressures of adulthood. Life never was quite the same. Although there was nearly a decade of decent times compared to recent years. We all know it's social media/internet and technology. The anxiety we all feel because we don't know what patience is anymore. Everything and every person is at our fingertips now. That's a huge part of the anxiety we all feel. Let alone being addicted to connection with others while simultaneously hating people wanting our attention all day. Plus comparing our everyday life to the best snapshot versions or complete lies of how great everyone else is. And how the elite have used all of this to keep us weak and divided. And then COVID. Despite being 42, I still enjoyed nightlife pretty often before and into COVID. Having laid low for other reasons the last year and a half, last weekend I drove around a few of the popular areas for bars and clubs that I wouldn't have frequented just a couple years ago. Some of these places having been there for a few years to a couple decades. And so many of them are gone. I felt like I must have fast-forwarded to my 80s and reminiscing about a few decades ago. Not 30 months ago. The teen adults/early 20-somethings I know. They have very little social skills. Even less charisma. They boys have no clue how to appeal to women. They just play video games, watch TikTok and complain about not getting matches on dating sites. They don't go out because the girls that are any better than that are just posting half-naked selfies all over mostly for likes, or hanging out with guys closer to my age that have some life experience, game and the financial means to take them to places they won't actually experience because they will spend more time on their phone posting to show the world they are having fun. Perhaps things have changed in a bigger way than usual. I surmise that all generations feel this way. My mom used to talk about how bars and clubs became so much less glamorous with the advent of sports bars and they started putting TVs in every bar and restaurant. Now we carry them in our pocket.
Because ist vor 5 stunden 425 as a teen, I actually used to be really deeply emotionally immersed in what I learned in history class, and while visiting Poland and Auschwitz in a class trip, I felt almost like I've somehow been there. It was a deep sense that something was wrong and a sense of spiritual connection to the history. Of course, it could never compare with having actually been there. I don't really immerse myself in history the same anymore. But nowadays I'm just terrified of World War III possibly breaking out because of the Ukraine war, and at the same time constantly hoping for the war to end, also for the sake of those who have to fight it or live in need because of it. I feel dejected over it going on, but get excited from reading any indication that it could end soon, and terrified at any indication it could escalate. It feels like a really uncertain, unstable time that could easily change in either direction. I would say my personal life ignoring what's going on in the world is actually mostly good, but I'm exceptionally lucky there.
JC verse 7 stand in this line will always struck my mind. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. We are in the era of hard times, and now especially with a lot of distractions and stimulation. I'm glad people like you and others who feel and realizes the current situation of our world we living is different and cruel, cause a lot of people say the world is changing but they don't take it seriously as it is. I hope everyone to see this video and realize something, cause to be honest it kinda feels like we are alone having the thought of it. God bless everyone.
Puff Jig for 18 stunned, and I feel like the world peaked in 2014 and something in the world completely flipped since then. The globe has rolled down a hill that gets steeper and steeper each year. I thought I was the only one. I sometimes felt I was the irrational one, but it's something I've felt in my soul that I cannot shake.
Terminator ver 2 Stunden im born in 1998, and to me it feels the world drastically changed after 2012. I don't know why and can't really explain the feeling, but most people seem not as happy and free as they were before. I thought it was just me growing up and being nostalgic about the great memories in my childhood. But I guess the world is changing at an incredible speed and it's hard to keep up.
Sebastian Bolduk vor 2 Tagen Berbaitet, my father, born in 1938, was 39 when I was born. He passed away 2 years ago at the age of 82. I was 43 at the time of his passing. It's safe to say that most people in my age group have had grandfathers in roughly the same age group as my dad. My father remembered standing in line at the grocery store with his mother during WW2. He was 7 years old when WW2 ended. My father told me that certain food items were rationed amongst the general population. It didn't matter how rich or poor you were. Everyone had a limited supply of bread, sugar, per household, per week. Hearing information such as that coming to you directly from your own father, and the struggles his and his parents' generation had, is much different than reading about it in a textbook. And when the COVID hit, the stories my dad told me about diseases going around during his and his parents' generations. Heck, even stuff most people never heard about outside of the Spanish flu. It makes you realize how easy we have life nowadays. We're freaking spoiled within the developed nations, within reasoning. He was much wiser than I ever was, especially when he warned me about all the distracting Hollywood pop culture BS. He always told me when I was young that no matter how beautiful some of their art may be, that they're all money grubbers. Mind you, he grew up when there was no Hollywood or music industry. Okay, maybe Hollywood, but not the same as we see nowadays. Now that I'm much older, I perfectly comprehend what he was warning me about. And one of those things was to not waste too much money or my own philosophies upon entertainments. Or as he used to say, those people don't care about you or the average person. They're all hypocrites. Of course, he meant that in a general assessment. There are always the exceptions. Why do I mention pop/celeb culture? It's because nowadays everyone is staring at a freaking screen, like the Greek god Narcissus staring at his own reflection upon the water. Don't become too distracted from your life with entertainments. And of course, I am as guilty of this as everyone else. It seems that more and more of us are no longer invested within ourselves and the relationships/communities surrounding us. We're always being distracted by money exchangers, aka entertainments/entertainers. They do serve an important role within a civilization. However, it's way too much. Even Plato warned that if life begins to imitate art, rather than art imitating life, that it would lead to a downfall of civilization. So far his assessments have aged like fine wine. Even during the fall of Rome, they too had their celebrity chiefs.
Michael Dunaway for 14 stunden. I appreciate this thoughtful video. A couple things come to mind. First, one issue is that people in general simply accept the world as it is presented to them. They either don't like to think or have never thought deeply enough to understand life on a deeper level. Notice I say presented to them. This means that the dominant conversation or media will steer the world of the average person. Second, much of recorded history shows that people in power do not really have the average citizen's well-being in mind. Rather, they seek power, money, ego, and exhibit an addiction to these things. With the rise of technology, we have seen the powers show their true colors. This does not mean that all leadership is destined for trouble. Look at the life of Gandhi. Third, phones are not phones anymore. You can figure this one out. Essentially, we should not just use the past as a guide map to a better future. The 90s will never come back, so how can we focus our attention away from the darkness? We can recreate and live again the great and inspiring experiences from before, get into the feeling, and then use intuition to create something new today. At first in doubt. Other helpful ideas: time in nature away from all devices and technology, meditation, focusing with instilling the busy thoughts, finding something we love to do that is not following news every day, and finding people in person we can spend time with, expanding and sharing good experiences in joy. Remember, this man's creations were made for us and not us for them. So these days with technology, if you use it too much, you are a slave, and that is exactly where they want you. Putting the tech down can be like waking up from a bad dream. I hope to see more videos like this. I just give my limited perspective for your consideration here.
As for 12 stunden, unlike most people in this comment section, I am very young, just 15, but I can't help but feel that something that I can't put my finger on has changed. And it feels like it is for the worse. There seems to be such a huge disconnect between our online personas and real life. It's scary. Don't know what to trust anymore. Feel this unshakable sense of impending doom in my gut. I used to think I was experiencing all of this because I am in the angsty teenager phase of my life, but apparently other people feel this way too. I guess the internet has gifted us in that sense. It's easier to find community. But it just doesn't feel as fulfilling or real.
Ryan G. for 16 stunden. As someone born in 7 and is 15. I hear my parents who are in mid-40s talk about how different life is now. Finances, morals, government, and so on. I love to learn about history, so I have an idea what they are talking about. But honestly, I can't really connect because I grew up in this new era. I don't really remember life without technology. Shoot, my friends when I was 9 had iPhones. I and all my classmates grew up having anxiety going to school because what we saw on the news, especially only being hours away from Parkland. And honestly, I don't really have hope for the future. I genuinely think things will only get worse in this country, and I know everyone feels it regardless of age.
Nekezi for 17 stunden. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I have made a note of your reading suggestions and will be acquiring these. Thank you.
James Hilton for 17 stunden. Maybe this dark moment is necessary, though, like we had to see our shadow side so we could deal with it. It's just that we're not dealing with it great right now. It may be a darkest before the dawn type thing. If you look carefully, you can actually see positive potential there that wasn't there before. It's just coming out in clumsy ways because it's new.
Robin Misnarek for 22 Stunden. I was born in 1963. Growing up in the 60s, 70s and up to 1985 were the best of times. Simpler times. So much freedom and so much fun. Then in 1985 things started changing very quickly. So quickly that I couldn't keep up. I don't like how technology has changed the world. In some areas such as the medical field and a few others it's good, but mostly it's driven people apart and changed people. And there's just so many rules and regulations these days. I would love to get in a time machine and go back to around 1979 and stay there forever.
Clara Buns for 52 minuten. Hi Stefan, thank you so much for this enlightening video. I can also say that I have felt this, but I don't think I had a way to describe it until watching this video. For me, it greatly feels like a loss of connection with ourselves, others and the environment. Like you said, we are so focused on these little black boxes that we seem to be missing what else there is to learn or experience about / in the world. Keep up the great work.
Ruth Wilson for 4 Stunden. Great videos, Stefan. I am the same age as you and I too feel the same way you do. You described things perfectly in the video. Worrying to think that we are at the end of the cycle and the unknown that awaits us. Let's hope it's a change in the right direction.
Perry for 17 Stunden. I feel like ever since 2020 this is a whole different world we are living in.
Danny Adams for 4 Stunden. I'm almost 30, and I can see the changes too. To live in today's world feels like living while walking on eggshells. So much angst, so much fear and suspicion. So much bleakness. But what people doing about it other than observing it and talking to anyone who will listen about it? I've talked to one too many people who complain about the way the world is, but they continue to perpetuate the cycle. People will complain about how they can't say anything about being criticized and then turn around to dedicate time from their lives to cancel someone else. People will complain about how hard it is to form bonds with other people, and then turn around and purposefully sit around their house all day, or better yet give the silent treatment to someone who is already close to them and then be surprised when that person has left. People will complain about the lack of harmony and respect and then turn around and rip a person to shreds and dehumanize them because they found out that person voted for someone else on election day. People will complain about the lack of passion and drive in the world and then turn around and discourage another person from living their dream because it's too out there, or because seeing that person live out their potential will remind them of how much they're not doing in their life. People will complain about the lack of individuality in the world and then turn around and badmouth another person's interests and hobbies. People will complain about how the world is superficial and only material things and money seem to matter, and then turn around to post brand names on their social media, flex their wealth on dating apps to attract a mate, and buy up as much as they can on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. People will even complain about how the quality of food has changed and then turn around to buy the very foods they call shitty. People will complain about how the corporations / companies rule over us and then turn around and buy their products. Boycotting is such a joke because it's like people giving the business a silent treatment or shunning for a life bit before buying from those businesses again when they're done being moody and socially righteous. People will complain about how kids can't even play outside anymore and then turn around and sit their kids in front of an electronic device, or tell them they can't play with the neighbor's kids because they don't like their parents for some petty or discriminatory reason. People will also complain about how the world isn't safe for their kids and then turn around and abuse kids or turn a blind eye to someone else abusing kids. People will complain about how the world is unsafe and then turn around and want to physically fight another person over a perceived slight. The hypocrisy is real. Things have changed, things have spiraled downwards, but none of it has changed overnight or behind the scenes. We've all seen the changes as they've been happening, and a lot of people have decided to step aside and save their energy too used to towards complaining about it later while they fall in line like obedient ducklings. It doesn't have to be this way. Your life doesn't have to be this way. But it will be if you let other people take the wheel and drive a car off a cliff.
Or as for 7 Stunden, I'm almost 30, born in 93, and I do feel like everything has changed. I also have an almost 2-year-old, and I feel sadness when I think about his future. I love him to bits, but sometimes I sort of regret having him because I don't want him feeling pain. I know I grew up in severe poverty and food insecurity, and maybe that's why I have so much fear of my son's future, but I worry he might have it worse than me.
And Stanislawski for 4 Stunden. Yes, I feel like everything has changed. I have had a kind of ominous feeling now ever since the COVID policies started. You are not alone. I think reading history and trying to understand the past of our world will be important for preparing us for a scary future and hopefully avoiding more tragedy.
Jermaine Holmes for one tag. People usually don't talk about these changes because they think it's just them. I recently found out from daring to ask everyone around me if their sleep cycle seems messed up, and so far everyone I know said yes. Without exception. 3 a.m. was the most mentioned time. Even my sister that lives in Europe said she had issues waking up in the middle of the night. Imagine how many more are out there. What would be causing this? No one seems to have an answer except that it's extraordinarily bizarre.
The plain esthetician for 6 Stunden bearbeitet. I was born in 1983. I had often pined for the 1990s and its simplicity, but often blamed it on childhood nostalgia. Now I'm not so sure. You've brought some excellent points with memory and knowledge. When we forget, we repeat.
In 3 for 2 Stunden, I was born in 1974 and grew up in an isolated Midwest farming community. My dad built the house, and common activities were gardening, canning, and I had carte blanche exploration across miles and miles of open territory. Intense reader, huge imagination, and wired me for the rest of my life. Fast forward, attended a private university on scholarship, took my first major work opportunity in London, then in NYC, and spent 25 years between these locations, now touch West Coast. I've schemed for decades on how to reestablish myself in the idealism of those early years, but every period of time and place are unique unto themselves and cannot be duplicated, period. Ergo each day is unique to itself, and we to a large degree create our reality. I only recommend people read just anything and everything. Reading is one of the only forms of true knowledge acquisition, and knowledge acquisition is a form of super-reality. I have no doubt the world incrementally will move into greater cycles of dystopia, greater dysfunction, and that is the destiny of our world. There is no utopia, but we can at minimum be self-educated and kind within reason to one another.
Lamdrick 1701 for 2 Stunden. I won't lie, this brought me to tears because I've been feeling like this for a very long time, and I thought I was alone feeling this way. I'm 35, and one of the points you touched upon was how our living memories of the Second World War are now no longer with us, and people now can't relate. It's frustrating because my grandmother is still alive today. Granted, she is no longer all there in her mind, but she is still alive, and here we are, potentially standing on the edge of another world-changing war.
Adam's Paramotor Life for 24 minutes and excellent points made. I think what hit me the most was the idea that nobody making decisions has experienced the darkness that poor decisions led to. I've been an educator of teens for many years, and as much as I can tell them the consequence of bad choices driving, for example, it seems people have to experience the consequence to learn. So with that in mind, it tells me we are in for a world of hurt before anything positive comes from it.
Movement encouraged fitness for 1 tag bearbeitet. Yes dude, I am 30 years old. Born in 1992. I'm 2 years older than you. And I do feel like everything has changed. I'm alone often, and so sometimes I go drive at night and I swear I can feel it in the air. Less people are out on the roads. Things seem eerie. I was thinking last night while I was out, where is everybody? Just driving around in a Saturday night at the 830 felt apocalyptic to me. And socially things are different. It's hard to express yourself without judgment or some kind of minor persecution. Big man, maybe it's because we were little in the past and things felt magical naturally. But things really do feel off.
John Hyde for one stunned excellent video and observation on your part. I'm 57 years old and have many friends and coworkers either around my age or a decade younger, and almost everyone feels the same. We are on the verge of something monumental, and it may not be for the better.
Ted Campos vor 15 Stunden, let it be known that this was the moment. The moment of change, Stefan. There will come a time that I will be thanking you in person for a clarity and visual style that hit me right between my eyes tonight. It shook me. And I continued. In reverse through about 10 more videos worth of honesty, watching the reasons for videos I hadn't yet witnessed before. I was even inspired to film a bit of myself as raw and unfiltered as I possibly could. Aside from a setback, I felt lighter and more willing to go hard. Basically, thank you for speaking to me the way I hear myself speak when no one is around, and thank you for using the beauty of film to reinforce the images that make me sit up and listen. Cheers, brother.
Michael Kyle was 7 Stunden thoughtful, down to earth and mature. I enjoyed this very much. And yes, I also feel like something is deeply off, so to speak. It's the best time to be alive, and yet, it feels there is a cloud of confusion that is increasing and hanging over everything and everyone, building to a moment where it all will pop and we will get the reality check that we deserve and which is actually, ultimately, best for us.
It was 17 Stunden. I've literally had all of these same thoughts, and I've come to the same conclusions. It's a very difficult time to sit and watch, work, and survive. Especially if you're working towards a high ideal.
Kong 64 vor 19 Stunden. The scary part is that one of these season changes could have a calamity that ends everything permanently.
Naughty girl vor 1 tag. I'm 33. You're not alone in this feeling. This subject is often discussed among my boyfriend 40 and myself. My mother 65 also feels this way. Everything just feels so awful. I'm not a Christian, but it really makes one ponder.
Juju for 16 Stunden. Everything is and will always change. It is the flow of life and inevitable. The only difference on how one is affected by this change or changes is how aware you are from moment to moment. So to expand on this just a little, I would say for the next minute, stop everything you doing, bring yourself to a standstill and become totally aware of the moment you are in. Become aware of everything around you, your thoughts, the sounds, the environment, the smells, your breath and so on. Do not grab onto any of them or engage with any of them, just maintain a relaxed observation of them all, but not of one thing in particular. As this moment passes, do the same in the next moment. I found this as one of the hardest things to do until I started practicing certain things that I won't really go into for the sake of relevance to this video. So what I am saying is, in my own experience, when my state of being was slowly being adjusted and finally calibrated to be present, then nothing felt like a major shift at all as to how I perceive life, because there is quite a lot going on from moment to moment in comparison to a general sense of being from a collective point of view. Not sure if that makes sense, but let's just say it feels really good in the present, in opposed to being in the present but recalling from memory or jumping into the future and creating possibilities of things that may happen, and then to a degree having these thoughts govern my present tense and somewhat turning it into a living reality.
Jane 10 vor 20 Stunden, bearbeitet. 3.58 The clip of the forest. The sky full of stars are what I imagine as home. Thank you for making it as part of your video. It's truly beautiful. 5.16 Yes, it's true. It's always been stuck in my head since young, but I couldn't put it into words. You've described it really well. So thank you for spreading it to us, this beautiful message. To your last question, yes, a lot has changed. There's digital dementia, digital overload, all sorts of stuff. But as a techie, I'm glad I found my passion, spend most of my days with the greatest gift this century brought. However, I hope people are more aware of how they use their phone, like not using it while eating, not seeing an screen, and how before sleep, as the blue light can disrupt our circadian rhythm.
Swoozy Sensei vor 18 Stunden, born in 94. I've always been feeling this way for some time now. I think in a way the world has become hyper-optimized. The best was the early 2000s. Just like the RuneScape piece, for example, gaming, people had to actually work and figure things out. Every game now is literally just balanced, and everyone has the same gear and strategy. No fun. It feels like people don't care as much about their actual jobs anymore. Like seeing someone with commitment just is extraordinary. Perhaps something will happen. It sure doesn't feel good, although people should be living their best lives.
Subscribers for 15 Stunden subscribe. I love people who are not afraid to question and then delve into it. Then on top of that also can articulate themselves like you do. You are a thinker and an artist/storyteller. God bless you.
Artemiu Sandoval vor 1 tag bearbeitet as a late 90s/early 2000s kid. I've noticed this change in mood in society. I think it's a culmination of many things as to why everything just doesn't feel good. Rooted trauma from 9/11, increased difficulty in affording a comfortable life, influence of the internet, especially smartphones. Our phones and social media has disconnected us from each other and the world. Consider how much in-person interaction we had before the internet took off to pass the time. People these days are increasingly directionless, lack purpose, decline in religious beliefs, interests and hobbies. There's our built environment too. Everything is just sterile and bleak, which doesn't help. There's more reasons, but that's what all comes to mind.
Over 31 minutes and I'm almost 40 and first started noticing things starting to go wrong with our culture in the late 90s. It's impossible for me to separate the nostalgia I have for the 80s and 90s from how things are today though. Were times then really better? I think overall yes, but it could be due to ignorance and not being completely inundated with media like today. It's a thought I have struggled with for a long time.
Spirit Ranger 9 vor 20 Stunden bearbeitet. I believe that what will come will be better. We have become apathetic, debauched, immoral, materialistic. We don't go outside. We don't communicate with other humans anymore. Everything is so disconnected. We aren't in touch with nature. Most people are just drifting. The pendulum has to swing the other way. It may hurt at first, but there is opportunity for those who are ready.
Andromedamon vor 19 Stunden. I've had a theory about major world catastrophes happening every generation or so for years. Didn't know there was actual research on it and a proposed time frame. Super fascinating.
Basis for 21 Stunden. It's like something is gone, but no one can explain what it is. All that can be said is whatever it was important and it was taken suddenly. I feel this odd sense of dread sometimes. It's not very strong, but the question that keeps coming to my mind when this feeling presents itself is, where is everyone? I have my friends, family, and co-workers, but as a comment I read on this video said they can drive at night on a Saturday night and feel like they are in an empty apocalyptic world.
Julie Arcand for 13 Stunden. Absolutely. Everything feels unkind, hurried, stressed, and yes, I believe the internet has a lot to blame.
Night Owl vor 5 Stunden. You have inspired me to purchase REId8lfmmhI's book. I highly advise you to put affiliate links in your description, if possible, because I would gladly purchase through said link to support your channel.
Rosilf Sharon vor 15 Stunden. I miss actual interactions with people, honestly. I have an MBA and I've noticed the changes occurring. I appreciate you taking this bull by the horns and providing plenty of citations on your feelings.
And Mario vor 5 Stunden. I acknowledged this when being 10 and saw my younger, 6 brother in school, totally different environment in the same building. How we played in the schoolyard, the street, totally different. He had a totally different childhood. I saw it and was amazed. My children vary in ages much, so the eldest and the youngest also live in different worlds, but the gap between my brother and me was bigger. Back then there was a huge optimism, everyone a better life, opportunities, handy items, off days, holidays abroad. Everything was possible, technicians solved all problems, women were liberal and independent, for every pain a cure. No more war, no nukes. Life was great. Then the oil crisis, the 80s, then after 2000 things went really wrong, first slow. But harder and faster. Now there is an endless line of problems, future disasters, criticism, hardcore revolutionaries, a despicable elite, and last but certainly not least the with class Schwab.
Kai 272 vor 22 Stunden. It's actually pretty relieving to see so many people have the exact same thoughts and feelings I've been obsessing for a couple years now. I thought it was all me and my depression. I don't feel so alone in this anymore.
Denise Michaels vor 1 Stund. I watched Bohemian Rhapsody last week and teared up at the end. At 58, life was so much simpler. The 80s were a time of patriotism and optimism. The hundreds of thousands in the stadium were singing and having fun. Politicians weren't TV celebrities, no 24-hour news, cell phones or social media. There weren't epidemics of autism, cancer and poor physical and mental health. The biggest thing I remember is having freedom. My children have never known the freedom we had.
Nickel quarter vor 18 Stunden. I'm about to turn 19. I really feel like something really bad is going to happen. And I feel we don't even have 2 years left. Sometimes, I don't see myself being 21, having a car, my own place to stay, even if it's just an apartment for the rest of my life, and a pretty good carrier that can at least keep me up on my bills and get the stuff I need. Sometimes, I just don't see that happening. Sidirum vor 5 Stunden bearbeitet. I'm 25 and life feels so strange these days. I feel uncomfortable even in my own home half the time in fear that I'm being watched. I keep looking out of windows trying to see who's watching me do my day-to-day activities. Probably paranoia, but it's still a concerning feeling.
Frederick Schuozen vor 1 Stund. I would say that for me this past year has been incredibly hard in many ways personally. All sorts of realizations and epiphanies surrounding the status of society now and how unnatural and eerie everything seems to have gotten. I switched my iPhone with an old Nokia 2 months ago, in a leap of faith towards escaping the algorithms of our digital globalist world. As a 19-year-old, I see my generation incredibly damaged by this world, longing for meaning, uncertain of how to act, feel, talk, think. This world is turning quickly, and no one seems to take notice. Glad you spoke up, brother.
Eric Rosen vor 3 Stunden. Of course I feel the same. Born in 1955, studied science all my life, have an engineering degree. My mother was a nurse, so learned a lot about medicine. Read books on history and philosophy. Traveled widely, learned a few languages. So old enough for the after effects of WW1 and WW2 to have been ingrained in me by my parents. In-depth knowledge spanning many fields. It seems to me that wise people are ignored. The truth is out there, but it is actively censored by the powerful, and few choose to seek it, believing the propaganda. I feel like I spend my whole life surrounded by ignorant people who vote for ignorant politicians who make ridiculous decisions. I can guess what dire results will occur years or decades ahead of it happening. Also tragic, really.
Robert Hadley vo 2 Tajan, beat it. As someone who came of age in the 90s, I have noticed a very rapid change. It seems that everything peaked in the late 90s/early zeros and then a switch flipped in the late zeros. Everything is different and most people just want to act as if nothing has changed. This is especially true of the powers that be. They don't want to adapt to the inevitable and are trying to keep the flame of the post-war era lit to prevent the darkness we must face from creeping in. The problem in my eyes is the longer you ignore and fight the dark, the stronger it gets. But few want to acknowledge it. When it finally takes over, it will be ugly. The avoidance of discomfort and change always leads to destruction.
Prepping with Sarge vor 11 stunden, you're not wrong. I am just grateful I grew up in the 70s and 80s. We were the last generation to grow up playing outside, with only a few channels of television, and when people actually looked at each other when talking. If you wanted to talk to someone who lived far away, you talked on the telephone, not some cold, short text. I miss those days, but we are never going back. Even those of us who grew up without today's technology have succumbed to it. Most, including me. And there is a direct correlation between the rise of social media and the rise in teen depression/self-harm. Humans are evolving into something else, some kind of cybernetic partisan society, where nobody listens to anyone who does not think exactly like them. Sorry for the sentence structure issues there. Those of us who grew up during those days remember our grandparents, uncles, aunts, etc. debating politics at the kitchen table without the disdain for the other's opinion. Those days are gone, as is our humanity. We already peaked humans, I mean. Whatever we evolve into now will look very different.
Debbie really vor 10 stunden in my 40s. I think the 90s and early 2000s weren't as rosy as you might believe. Although 1999 was one of the best years of my life because I met my husband, the 90s had a lot of cynicism and people mindlessly watched hundreds of cable stations. If you didn't look like an Abercrombie and Fitch model, you'd never really be in the crowd. It was also very dangerous in the city I grew up in, Birmingham, Alabama.
John's Acharkin vor 3 stunden and it will change again and again, I'm sure. But the way we interact with each other and communicate every day certainly has changed. Public interactions occur so much less than they used to. In the past, restaurants used to be bustling with strangers commonly socializing. Communities existed outside them, gossiping the tea of the town, and packed public places like subways/trains were all areas where common chatter has been substituted with strange silence, and it was like the Corona era really kicked us into it.
Angela Benz vor 12 stunden, yes, definitely. My daughter brought this up to me just tonight as we were chatting. Everything feels strange or not right. Through experiencing many changes and challenges over the years, to which I feel we adapted, somehow these times today are different. I see and hear many people feel the same, so we are not alone in our thoughts about this. It's like the world is off balance. Let's see. Perhaps hopefully there will be a shift again that will bring about some sense of stability.
Melissa Ayers vor 14 stunden, yes, everything has changed interior and exterior of my life. I have definitely connected more spiritually, as well as to be extremely mindful of your thoughts and words in which then connect with the feeling, to experience my reality.
Arthur vor 6 Tajan, yes. I also feel like there has been some fundamental shift for the worse, like we passed some inflection point. On top of that, I have this additional feeling that there is a collective turning of the eye away from it, a willful attempt at ignoring it. That denial, I feel, is frankly more alarming to me than the shift itself, so thank you for being one of the people who is talking about this.
Lizzie in Hawaii for 11 minutes and I'm 37, and yes, I have felt this way for about 5 years now. I have talked to so many people who absolutely feel the same way.
Enrique for 18 stunned, and yes, sometime around 2014 everything shifted subtly, not necessarily the bad thing though. As they say, you get used to everything, and everything turns to ashes. You can't enjoy life forever. I think the problem is that everything is so rushed now. Everybody is so fast and trying to get everything. At 90s we were slower, we were enjoying things for a longer period before they got boring and so on.
Claire Vukes 11 for 31 minutes, and I can't believe this. I was hoping, dreaming you would actually use this book, the first book. I speak constantly of this cycle to my daughter. I did a PowerPoint to my young constituents in my speech class about the generational cycles when I was in my 40s, giving this little lesson to what were mostly 19-year-old freshmen. There is so much to learn from these cycles. Good point about food production. We need to rethink and think again of the global impact of food production. We've got to figure this out. I'm going to have to read some of these books. Yes, we are in a crisis point. Very dangerous times. There is a bigger picture here for sure. Step back and ask yourself what the next phase could be based on historical conquests.
Apes gone 9 stunned, and I agree about losing their memories. I'm in my 40s. I grew up surrounded by people who have gone through the war and lost everything. They all had stories. And the stories were etched on their psyches and faces. Yet now they are all gone, and their stories are told by people who just read about the war in books and reimagined what it was like based on movies or logic of their peaceful lives. These new people can never feel the same horror or caution, so they march forward into the same old pitfalls with a naive conviction that they have learned something from the past they don't even know.
Unwritten by one tag. Yes, something is so off. I was born in 89, and growing up in the 90s was so vibrant and felt fun. The energy of everything changed in the 2000s as technology and the internet advanced. Currently, I live fully and experience lots of joy emotionally, but I am no longer optimistic about the external world. None of my friends/family speak on the weirdness we are all facing. We simply cannot carry on with this trajectory. I'm very interested to see how this all plays out.